drink so that we can get settled and get on with it, as they say. So thank you very much for coming, and it's really a pleasure to see so many of you. My name is Vicki Gabbro, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. So we are here to discuss our regional economy, and in particular how we might best influence and guide economic development to ensure a prosperous and competitive region. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. We are going to be hearing about regional economic drivers and how we might leverage assets to overcome problems and challenges. And we will consider the future of jobs in the region and the role of regional affordability in attracting and keeping talent, always a problem. These are big issues that together affect how we prosper as a region and maintain a competitive edge in a global economy. So let's start with Lorraine Kopis.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on the question of economic competitiveness and prosperity. It may seem strange in one way to have a social planner lead the conversation on the economy, but I think increasingly we're understanding the importance of the economy to all aspects of regional life and the importance of social policy to a strong economy. And so you start to see these important points of intersection and connection, and I think it comes down to the question of well-being. How do we create a high quality of life for everyone? There's a lot of discussion these days about structural changes that are taking place in the broader global economic context, and these changes will no doubt affect the Metro Vancouver region and are affecting the region as we know it today. When you look at Metro Vancouver and the question of economic competitiveness and prosperity, I think it comes down to three kind of central areas to explore, and they're huge. And the first is you really want good investments in your economic and social infrastructure. And when I say that, I'm talking about investment in jobs, housing, and education. You want the types of investments that you need to support a strong and vibrant economy. And I think that the conversations that happen in these rooms, the conversations that happen at local councils and at the Metro Vancouver board table are the kinds of conversations we need. What are the investments in the economic infrastructure we need to make around transportation, around industrial land? And what are the types of investments in the social infrastructure that we need to make around housing, around education, jobs? I think when you look at this, you'll always see that critical to that question are partnerships. That's partnerships with other levels of government, and that's partnerships with the private sector, with the academic sector, with the community. So what does that look like when we're talking about the economy? Well, there are important investments and that can be made in research and development, in training and education to ensure that you have the workers with the skills that are needed to compete in the new economy. And we really want to create a growth model that does recognize and embrace the region's changing demographics and makes the type of investments that will allow current and future generations to move forward. There's also access to employment and economic opportunity. That's the type of quality and nature of the jobs that are created, and the importance of investing in new research and innovation so we can take advantage of the new economy. There's research that also suggests that social and economic disparities can adversely affect everyone, and that inequality is not only bad for those at the bottom end of the income distribution, but it can affect and limit growth across the region or across the well-being piece. I think that that's an important piece to look at. I think that there are questions around a vanishing middle class, and we have to look at what that might actually mean and how you create the jobs and the opportunities to help create that strong and vibrant middle class. I also think that diversity is an economic asset, and that diverse communities can help to create new markets and contribute to the development of new enterprises, as well as provide an important consumer base. And so in this way, we have to look at our region and the growth of our region as to how we can capitalize on that asset. The final point is affordability. That's everything from how parents are going to be able to get their kids out of their home into their own home, through to what kind of wealth has been created through having a home in this region. I think, though, if you put the overlay of the pressures on the middle class and those at the low end, those who are just entering the housing market, you can start to see that we almost live in two different regions in certain ways, and we have to really find a way to make that affordability equation work. I pulled the housing statistics for September, but it's no surprise to anyone in this region that regionally a single detached home is selling for almost $1 million, never mind some of the specialized markets that are out there that are selling for significantly more. But even the rental market is feeling the squeeze. There's a shortfall of new rental housing construction, which automatically creates upward pressure on rental prices. And so if you look at a 2-bedroom in Metro Vancouver today, a household would need $50,000 just to carry the cost of that rent at a price that used to be considered affordable. If you translate that into a housing wage, that means someone has to earn about $27 an hour. And the problem with looking at the average market rents in this region is that that's the older housing stock. A lot of that's been under rent control for a certain amount of time. If you look at the newer stock, which is your secondary rental market, the rent-a-condo stock, you're looking at rents of about $1,600 a month or an income about $66,000 to carry the cost of that rent. And so you start to see where the pressures and the squeezes are going to be on new immigrant households, on people considering moving to the region for new jobs and new opportunities, and for sure younger households just starting out on both their careers and their housing careers. So finding ways to address these pressures is critical. And I know that municipalities can only go so far because there's only so much you can get out of the regulations. I think that as we move forward, these types of regional conversations are important, and that it is really important for all of us to think about the aspects of the region that we love and the quality of life that the region's been known for, and think about what types of investments or strategies we need to try to maintain that high quality of life. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out. In my view, I'll keep it simple. There's only three economic drivers for growth that help pay for our standard of living, that includes our social benefits, education, and our medical system. And these are: you have to harvest it, mine it, or you manufacture it. It's a three-legged economic stool. Weaken or remove any of these three legs, and you impede your economy's ability to provide the standard of living that we here in BC have become accustomed to. It's the SMEs, the small, medium enterprises, that actually are creating jobs. And these represent over about 90% of manufacturing companies here in BC. As explained in the case for a national manufacturing strategy, a report by the Information Technology and Information Foundation, it is impossible for major economies to remain competitive without a viable manufacturing sector for 5 key reasons. 1, manufacturing plays a vital role in helping countries achieve balanced terms of trade. 2, manufacturing provides large numbers of above average paying jobs. Here in BC, manufacturing represents about 400,000 direct and indirect jobs, wages totaling about $8.6 billion, paying 15% higher than the average overall wage for industries here in BC and Canada. 3, manufacturing is the principal source of an economy's R&D and innovation activity. And here it represents over 42% of all private sector R&D. So over 42% of all R&D in the private sector is done through manufacturing. The 4th, the health of a nation's manufacturing and services sectors are complementary and inseparable. And 5th, manufacturing is essential to a country's national security. You're seeing that in spades in the US with their adversity to some foreign companies supplying into their manufacturing sector. Manufacturing has the biggest economic footprint in the province, bit of a surprise to some, with over 12,000 BC firms. 400,000 jobs, as I said, spread throughout the province, both direct and indirect. 8.6 billion in wages, and as I said, 15% higher than the overall average wage for all industries. Manufacturing pays 1/3 of all business tax revenues, while their employees contribute more than 2.5 billion in personal taxes every year. 11.2% of total provincial GDP, which has expanded, contrary to popular belief, by 43% since 1997. So this sector has been growing. That's compared to 11.2% compared to 5% in the high-tech sector with no expansion, and 3.8% of tourism where we've seen some decline. Manufacturers represent 75% of all merchandise exports, and BC is the only province, and just in the last year, is the only province that exports 50% of its goods to somewhere else other than the US. Compare that to Alberta, where 85% of all their exports are still dependent on the US. Economic spin-offs generate $3, just over $3 in new economic activity for every dollar spent in manufacturing. And manufacturers, as I said, represent over 42% in R&D. Manufacturing is the one key industry sector, again, surprisingly, that meets the Kyoto targets. The issues, though, as we move forward, is we have a pretty thriving manufacturing sector here, despite the current economy and where the dollar is. 64% of our members currently say that their growth of their companies, these are the job creators, 64% are saying that their growth is being impeded by the fact that they cannot find the skilled labor. So in this province, we have unemployment rate of just around 7%, under 7%, and yet these companies cannot find the skilled labor they need. So the big issue right today, before about, I think it's over 10 billion of major projects coming down the line in the next few years that will be looking for the same talent, we already have a shortage of skilled labor. And that's a big issue, and there's a big mismatch between the unemployed and the skill sets that those companies are looking for, which I can go into in more detail later. The last thing I just want to mention is on affordability. Outside of Metro Vancouver, we have a company right now that has doubled the employees on its shop floor in the last 18 months, but it's 5 design engineers it's short that it can't find. And when it's recruiting from places where it's not such a desirable place to live as the Okanagan, so that's a plus. They're providing salaries that were greater than, say, they were paying in Hamilton, which is a plus. The standard of living, quality of living, I should say, is better. But as soon as that individual clicks on to the real estate website, it's game over. In order for that individual to move, on average, they would have to have 4 times the salary they're being offered in order to make that transition. That's in Penticton. Now translate that into Metro Vancouver, where you've heard about the pricing. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I'd like to maybe get a sense of the audience. How many of you folks actually work in the tech sector today? Okay. So that's about the right ratio. About 1 in 10 people in Metro Vancouver, I would estimate, work in the tech sector. And maybe where I can start is a little background on our association. It's about a 20-year-old organization. It's, as Vicky said, we've really been focused on helping to drive the growth of the industry. We've seen over the last decade or so that it's really grown by leaps and bounds. In 1993, the industry was about $4 billion. Now it's about $20 billion in the province. So we've seen some really good growth. And what we do is we represent companies across all the main sectors. That would be clean technologies, digital media, wireless communications, telecommunications, software, IT, and some of the areas in life sciences. And we see everything from sort of 1 to 2 person startup organizations all the way up to very large multinational companies, everything in between. And I think most people would agree that technology has really been a transformative force in all of our lives, whether it's social media, everything that we do on Facebook, Twitter, all the stuff that we see in terms of digital media that's affecting how we learn and play and work. All these things, I think, are elements that are constituting the change that we're seeing in the dynamics of our society. A few months ago, our organization, along with our partner organizations in life sciences, also with the clean tech folks and Wavefront, we collaborated with KPMG to do an analysis and a study on what was happening in the technology industry in BC, and to really examine where the opportunities might lie over the next decade. I think the really great news out of all that is that the industry has really become a fairly significant economic engine for the province. I'll share a couple of stats because I think there's a test at the end of all this, so I hope you guys are taking notes. So tech was actually the fastest growing sector over the past decade and is now sort of the 3rd largest private sector contributor to GDP. It's created, you know, a lot of jobs, virtually more than any other sector. And as Peter shared, I think a lot of these sort of jobs pay higher than the average industrial wage. In fact, in the technology sector, it probably pays about 50% more than the average BC wage. There's now over 85,000 people that work in the tech sector, so roughly sort of 1 in 10 if you kind of normalize that across the province. What was really interesting is that's actually more people working in that sector than all of the resource industries combined. So when we did the math, if you add up mining, oil and gas, and forestry all together, there's actually more people working in tech than there are in all the resource industries. And I think that's a signal for where our economies are moving and where it's going to go in the next decade. What the report also said, I think this is really quite important, is that we have just barely begun to tap our full potential. As Peter alluded to, I think there's a lot of growth potential in this industry. I don't think we've fully captured it yet. The size of our industry is still significantly smaller on a per capita basis than what you might see in other jurisdictions, Ontario, Quebec, in the US. Our employment levels on a relative basis still have a ways to go. And our investments in some of the core elements that created innovation in society, like R&D and patents, and even our post-secondary number of degrees in those sorts of areas is still a fair ways behind some of the other jurisdictions. Now, the good news on all this is it's a huge market. It's about a $9 trillion market for global technology. It grows at about 7 or 8% per year. So for us, I think as a society here, not only in Metro Vancouver, but all of BC, there's an immediate and enormous opportunity for us to kind of capture greater economic benefits from that. And we have all the ingredients. We have all the ingredients here to be a world leader. Metro Vancouver, out of all the stats that I shared with you, you can multiply by 70%. That's about where we sit here in the region. It was recently ranked number 16 in terms of the top tech centers in the world. So from a startup ecosystem, nothing really beats it. I think we're also one of the areas where we've got a lot of talent. We've got some of the best post-secondary institutions here and one of the most diverse workforces anywhere to be found. So we've got the ingredients necessary to kind of build to the next stage. But as we all know, when you compete in this sort of industry, it's a global market, it's fiercely competitive, and it's all about achieving critical mass. Because in the end, I think the theme today is sustainability. And sustainability on economic terms requires that you achieve some form of critical mass, and it's creating, nurturing, and really growing what you've got here. So maybe I can share 3 simple ideas as to what we need to do as an industry and how we can kind of create a better environment for everything kind of in our neighborhoods and our communities. The first one is a real conscious effort to help our companies to grow. One of the issues that we face here in Vancouver and BC is that we have an awful lot of small technology companies. Not that that's a problem in terms of creating innovation. That's certainly where jobs start. But when we have fewer than 4% of all of our tech companies with less than 50 employees, it indicates that we're sort of missing the scale necessary to really kind of grow more substantive companies. And we know that a sustainable, thriving community really relies upon the middle class segment. And you can use that same analogy in terms of companies. You need a lot of middle class companies to sustain real economic growth. The second piece is, and this is one of the things that I found as I migrated westward here, is that we could do a lot more to build a culture of supporting the companies that are here. In other words, creating home team advantage. So to the extent that our procurement policies and the things that we do, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, really create almost unfair advantage for those that are our neighbors in the companies that are being built and created here. I think we need to exert as much energy as possible to supporting the home team. And the final thing is, you know, I think it's about investing consciously in the new economy jobs, because that's really where the aspirations for, I think, a lot of us who have kids are. We're looking at the opportunity to kind of create the employment capabilities or the employment capacity so that we can really harness the creative and knowledge-based resources that we already have here and create clean and new economy careers for the next generation of Vancouverites. And with that, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and focus on a little bit of a different perspective not just from Vancouver, Metro Vancouver and BC, but from a global perspective, and put that into a bit of context around that without repeating what's already been said. So a couple of things, and I think it's really important first off to, and Lorraine certainly hit on some of this, define, well, what is prosperity today in the 21st century? You know, we often think of it as a economic prosperity, but it certainly is not just that. It's really the state of flourishing or thriving, which includes economic and social aspects of life, but overall it also includes wealth and factors independent of wealth to varying degrees, such as health and happiness. How happy are we in our cities and our communities in terms of our satisfaction with what we're doing? Though economic wealth is definitely at the center of prosperity, especially in the 21st century, and I think we've seen that demonstrated by the current global circumstances. And economic health is the driving force for social and even environmental prosperity, depending on how we want to define that. So what about BC? Is British Columbia a high-performing province? It's actually, and you heard some of the stats here today, we have some, you know, some peaks and valleys. There's no question about that. And overall, we're a moderate performer. So there's room for improvement. And that's the fun part for what we do, especially in economic development, is we identify, well, where is that room for improvement? And what are the solutions to making sure we're addressing that? So we are, in BC, mild underperformers in exports, productivity, average wages, household incomes, employee numbers, retention of startups, and Bill certainly talked about some of the culture and the incredible innovative culture that exists here in British Columbia. In other areas like cultural engagement and business growth rates. However, we're incredible leaders in key sectors like screen-based media, digital media, visual effects, film and television. It's all around us. We see filming going on every day. And those sectors have grown significantly just over the last couple of years, particularly in visual effects and animation. We are one of the world's top centers in mining exploration and exploration finance. We have small but nimble science clusters, our top global universities and educational institutions, and we're a leader in multimodal and intermodal transportation systems, especially with our port being the largest port in Canada and one of the largest in North America. We are extremely innovative, technological, and entrepreneurial people here in British Columbia. And of course, we have one of the most livable cities in the world. It's a powerful brand. A lot of what we do is we travel outside of British Columbia, and Vancouver's brand and Metro Vancouver's brand, you know, is really very, very strong. But what does it mean? It's not qualified, and that's one of the challenges. From a global context, we live in a bubble. Anyone travel outside of Canada lately? You know, so we hear stories. We talk to people, especially young people in London this summer. I talked to one of the young fellows who was a doorman at our hotel. He had 2 university degrees and he couldn't find a job. And so he was talking about how most of his friends were leaving the UK so that they could actually find employment. And that's certainly consistent with, you know, the European Union and some of the challenges that are happening there. And today, our talent, in terms of solutions, our talent is really our country's treasure. Forbes magazine says Canada is the best place in the world to invest right now. We are stable. The Economist says our banking system is the best in the world, and our social safety nets and legal systems are definitely the envy of developing nations. Nothing's ever perfect. I think Churchill coined it when he said, you know, in our systems, democracy is the worst kind of government, he said, oh, except for all the other ones. So we know it's not a perfect system, but we are the envy of the world. And anyone who has been paying attention globally knows how painful some of these adjustments, and frankly, necessary adjustments, albeit painful, are. A little bit of perspective from the corporate sector. Ernst & Young does a capital confidence barometer every year, and this year some of the results from leading companies and thought leaders in the corporate sector, they talk about their expectations of what's happening with the recovery. The key findings from business leaders, 78% think that the global economy shows no sign of improvement. 66% expect the downturn to persist for more than 1 year. Only 44% view credit availability as stable. That's quite low. There's a declining appetite for mergers and acquisitions, and I'm going to tie that back to what we do in Vancouver. Vancouver and British Columbia are strong centers for partnerships and bilateral trade. Mergers and acquisitions are a really important part of our economy and our prosperity. So those are indicators for us that are really important to understand. And the intention to divest is down, pardon me, to 19%. Anyway, ultimately, our strategic objectives are and need to be focused on central platforms of prosperity, which include economic development and social engagement. And that's been talked about, and it'll be talked about a little bit more. It's really critical. If we focus on ensuring our economy is stable and do a really good job in economic development and having this type of dialogue, it'll generate the prosperity we need to support the rest of our objectives in our social and environmental areas that are really important to us. Another key to this in terms of solutions is the focus on transportation. And there's much more here. I'm sure we're going to have some good dialogue, so I'll leave it there. But transportation is a critical aspect of prosperity and how well we do. I think most of you know a number of years ago the story about Boeing leaving Seattle, and a key factor in their decision was traffic congestion and the problems with transportation of employees and talent. So those are things that are really important for us to focus on. Thank you.